Throughout history, human beings have always had this deep, undeniable fascination with kings. But well, what exactly happens when that ancient, hardwired desire for a royal protector collides head-on with modern democracy? Welcome to part 36 of our Explainer, The Return of the King, the Psychology of Trumpism. Today we're putting on our lab coats and objectively acting as anthropologists. We're going to unpack the evolutionary biology and the deep psychological frameworks that drive extreme political loyalty. We'll be looking closely at how personality cults form and why, especially in times of crisis, humans have this deeply ingrained tendency to rally behind dominant-style leaders. We are strictly looking at the science, the data, and the history here to understand the machinery behind unwavering devotion.
So let's start by peeling back the layers of this very modern phenomenon by asking a fundamental question. Why do we so often abandon rational analysis and retreat to dominant figures when we feel threatened? History shows us time and time again that when populations face massive stress, a leader actually stops appearing as just a political figure. Instead, they begin to resemble a sacred protector. Citizens basically stop evaluating decisions rationally, and instead, they fiercely defend the hierarchy itself. To truly understand why this happens, we'd literally have to look all the way back to our evolutionary roots.
You see, evolutionary biologists observe that human leadership actually splits into two entirely distinct strategies. On one side, we have what's called prestige strategies. This is leadership freely given by followers because the leader demonstrates knowledge, skill, or generosity. Think of, say, the philosopher Confucius or a deeply respected local teacher. On the other side, though, we have dominant strategies. This is leadership based entirely on force, power, and coercion. It's like Machiavelli's old advice that it's safer to be feared than loved. While prestige generates true admiration, dominance operates on this potent mix of fear and relief.
And here's the wild part. These prestige and dominance archetypes aren't just human quirks. They span the entire animal kingdom. Researchers trace these exact same behaviors from non-human mammals, like male baboons, to warriors in early human societies, all the way up to the 45th U.S. president. Biologists and cognitive scientists objectively classify Donald Trump as a modern dominant style archetype. Why? Well, because his influence relies heavily on power asymmetry, highly assertive conflict management, and intense in-group loyalty, rather than the collaborative, consensus-driven traits you'd typically see in prestige leaders.
But to understand the intense appeal of these dominance leaders, we have to dive into our subconscious psychological fears. And this brings us to an absolutely fascinating concept called terror management theory, or TMT. Based on the work of cultural anthropologist Ernest Becker, TMT proposes that humans carry this unique and terrifying burden. We are consciously aware that our own mortality is inevitable. That's right, our brains are essentially ticking clocks, perfectly aware of our own impending doom, which, is just a great thought for a Tuesday afternoon. This realization collides with our basic biological instinct for self-preservation, and it creates a profound, latent existential terror. To manage this dread, we build symbolic cultures, belief systems, and rigid hierarchies that give us a sense of enduring meaning and absolute security.
Now, this latent fear translates into real-world political action through what's called the mortality salience hypothesis. It basically works in three phases. Phase 1, a population experiences an existential threat. This could be a war, a pandemic, a terror attack, or even severe economic uncertainty. Phase 2, this subtle or sometimes completely overt reminder of death compels people to fiercely defend their cultural worldview and seek out a safe haven. And then we hit Phase 3, which is charismatic submission. When our standard rational defenses are overwhelmed, we instinctively project our need for security onto a grand, dominant figure who promises absolute safety and clear black and white moral boundaries.
This isn't just some abstract theory either, it's highly measurable. Think about the September 11th attacks, an unprecedented mortality salience event for the United States. Following that event, President George W. Bush's approval rating surged by nearly 50%. That is a massive jump. Studies later showed this wasn't necessarily because of specific policy choices he was making, but because citizens were actively seeking an antidote to their collective existential dread. Reminded of their own mortality, they showed a powerful, deeply subconscious preference for a strong, iconic leader to shield them from danger.
So when you mix this deep-seated existential terror with our hardwired evolutionary bias for dominance in times of crisis, you get the absolute perfect recipe for unwavering political loyalty. People aren't just voting for a policy administrator at that point, they are psychologically clinging to a protector. And when this dynamic gets turbocharged by modern mass media and highly tuned political machinery, it gives birth to what we call modern personality cults. In contemporary politics, this brings us right back to our main subject. Academics and sociologists classify movements like Trumpism as modern personality cults. Now, it's important to note, this isn't a subjective political insult. It's a strict, structural classification. It's marked by unquestioning loyalty to a dominant patriarch, essentially a modern king, who provides psychological security to his followers. Just as we saw with the evolutionary dominance archetypes earlier, followers of these movements idealize the leader, defending the hierarchy and the individual over any kind of abstract, rational cost-benefit analysis.
But how exactly does a modern personality cult operate differently from, say, ancient kings who claimed they were literally gods? Well, historian Jan Plamper identifies 5 specific structural conditions. First, they're secular, anchored in popular sovereignty rather than divine right. Second, they historically center on exclusively male figures who project exaggerated physical and protective strength. Third, they target the entire universal population, not just a few elites. Fourth, they rely heavily on mass media to manufacture their charisma. And fifth, they thrive where media ecosystems can be controlled or manipulated to inhibit any rival narratives. It's a completely engineered apparatus.
Furthermore, sociologist Adrian Theodor-Popon notes that these systems require a very specific recipe to actually survive. First up, there's patrimonialism. This is fusing public office with private wealth and rewarding personal loyalty over bureaucratic merit. Second is the systematic falsification of culture. This is where history or current reality is rewritten to attribute all success solely to the unique genius of the leader. And finally, you have the systematic stifling of alternative narratives and dissidents. The leader's image basically becomes the only viable path to social and psychological survival.
Scholar John Pittman hits the nail on the head here. He encapsulates this endgame perfectly, describing the deeply patriarchal nature of these cults. The leader literally becomes the father of the people, sitting at the very top of a strict, pyramidal structure of authority. Ultimately, as populations face collective danger, whether that danger is real or just heavily amplified by the media, they increasingly project their need for a secure base onto these patriarchal figures. They treat them not merely as temporary political administrators you can just swap out every 4 years, but as sacred protectors who offer symbolic immortality and security against a completely chaotic world.
So, as we synthesize our primal biology with the realities of modern politics, ask yourself this the next time you witness extreme political loyalty, or even the next time you head to the voting booth yourself. Are you truly evaluating a leader based on a rational, objective analysis of their policies? Or are you, driven by the ancient machinery of your own brain, subconsciously managing your own existential terror and seeking a king to protect you? It's definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning what you see.